The siege of Masada, when 960 Jews defied an empire in the scorching desert of Judea, atop a towering mesa that rises like a stone giant from the Dead Sea's western shore, unfolds one of history's most haunting tales of defiance. The year is 73 CE, and the last ember of the Great Jewish Revolt flickers desperately against the crushing weight of Rome's military machine. What happened on this desolate mountaintop would echo through millennia, transforming a tragic last stand into a symbol so powerful that modern Israeli soldiers still swear their oaths upon its ancient stones. The fortress that time forgot Masada was no ordinary stronghold. Built by the paranoid King Herod the Great decades earlier, this architectural marvel crowned a mesa nearly 1,300 feet above the desert floor. Herod, ever fearful of his own people and Rome alike, had constructed the ultimate refuge, a fortress so impregnable that it seemed touched by the gods themselves. Massive walls, elaborate palaces, ingenious water cisterns, and enough storage rooms to feed an army for years transformed this natural citadel into what one Roman historian called a rock floating in the clouds. But Herod never imagined that his paranoid masterpiece would become the stage for the final act of Jewish resistance against Rome. The man who would not kneel. Enter Eliezer ben Yair, a name that would become synonymous with unyielding defiance. A leader of the Sicarii the dreaded, dagger men who had terrorized Roman officials and Jewish collaborators alike during the revolt, Eliezer was no ordinary rebel. Where others saw hopelessness, he saw opportunity. Where others counseled surrender, he preached resistance unto death. In 66 CE, as revolution swept through Judea like wildfire, Eliezer and his followers had seized Masada through cunning and bloodshed, overwhelming the small Roman garrison. For years, they used it as their base, launching raids against Roman supply lines and settlements. But by 73 CE, with Jerusalem destroyed and the temple in ashes, Masada had become something else entirely, the last free Jewish territory on earth. The eagle's shadow falls. The Roman response was as methodical as it was terrifying. Flavius Silva, the newly appointed governor of Judea, was a man who understood that symbols matter as much as victories. This wasn't merely about 960 rebels on a mountain. This was about demonstrating to the world that no one, absolutely no one, could defy Rome and survive. Silva's solution was characteristically Roman in its brutal efficiency. Rather than attempt a costly assault up Masada's treacherous slopes, he would starve them out. But even starvation wasn't dramatic enough for Silva's purposes. He needed a statement that would be remembered for generations. What followed was one of the most extraordinary engineering feats in military history. Silva ordered the construction of a massive siege ramp, a mountain of stone and timber that would allow his legions to literally walk up to Masada's walls. The project was staggering in scope, thousands of Jewish prisoners and Roman soldiers laboring under the merciless desert sun, hauling countless tons of rock and earth up the mountainside. The agony of the watchers. Imagine the psychological torture for Masada's defenders. Day after day, they watched their doom taking shape below them, growing inch by inch, stone by stone. They could see the sweating faces of Jewish prisoners, perhaps their own relatives, forced to build the instrument of their destruction. The sound of hammers and shovels echoed off the canyon walls like a funeral dirge. The rebels weren't idle. They built a second wall behind the first, reinforced their defenses, and prepared for the inevitable assault. But they all knew the bitter truth: Silva's ramp was not just engineering. It was theater. The Romans wanted them to suffer the agony of watching their fate approach with glacial inevitability. The final dawn, after months of construction, the ramp was complete. Silva's war machines rolled up its broad back, and Roman siege engines began their deadly work. The outer wall crumbled under the relentless pounding, but the defenders had prepared an inner wall of wood and earth that actually absorbed the impact of the projectiles. Frustrated but undeterred, Silva ordered fire arrows. The wooden wall caught quickly in the dry desert air, and soon flames were leaping toward the sky like sacrificial offerings to vengeful gods. As night fell, the wind shifted, blowing the flames back toward the Roman siege engines. For a moment, it seemed the gods themselves might intervene. But dawn brought cruel reality. The wind had shifted again during the night, and Masada's inner wall was now a smoldering ruin. The path lay open for Rome's legions. The choice that defied empire. It was then that Eliezer ben Yair made the decision that would transform him from a rebel leader into a figure of eternal legend. gathering his followers in Masada synagogue. He delivered what the historian Josephus would record as one of history's most stirring and chilling speeches. "My loyal followers," Eleazar began, his voice carrying across the stone chamber. "Long ago we resolved to serve neither the Romans nor anyone else but God alone. Now the time has come to make our words good by our deeds." The plan was as shocking as it was final. Rather than face capture, slavery, and the desecration of their families, the defenders would take their own lives. But this wasn't mere suicide, it was the ultimate act of defiance. Denying Rome its victory, spoils of Jewish slaves, and the propaganda value of parading the rebels through the streets of Rome. The Pact of Shadows. The logistics of mass death presented their own horrifying challenges. Jewish law strictly forbade suicide, but it did not forbid killing to prevent a worse fate. The solution was ingenious in its tragedy. They would draw lots. 10 men would be chosen to kill all the others. Then those 10 would draw lots again until only one remained to take his own life. Families gathered for their final moments together. Husbands kissed wives goodbye. Parents embraced children who would never see another sunrise. Personal treasures were destroyed so Romans could not profit from them. The very air seemed to thicken with the weight of approaching eternity. Archaeological evidence discovered decades later would confirm the terrible intimacy of these final hours. 11 pottery shards bearing names, including one reading Ben Yair, were found in what appears to be the northern palace, likely the very lots drawn that night. The silence that shook an empire. When Silva's legions stormed through the breached wall the next morning, expecting fierce resistance, they were met with something far more unsettling: absolute silence. No clash of weapons, no battle cries, no sounds of combat. Only the desert wind whistling through empty corridors. The Romans found 960 bodies arranged with dignity, families lying together as if merely sleeping. Only 2 women and 5 children had survived, hidden in a water cistern to tell the tale. The sight that greeted Rome's hardened veterans was so profound that many wept openly. Silva had won his victory, but it tasted of ashes. There would be no triumphal parade, no Jewish slaves to grace Roman markets, no propaganda value to be extracted from the conquest. Instead, the rebels had achieved something unprecedented in Roman military history. They had denied the empire its spoils through sheer force of will. The echo across millennia, the siege of Masada, became more than history. It became mythology. For nearly 2,000 years, the story lay dormant, preserved only in the writings of Josephus. But in the 20th century, as Jews faced their darkest hour in Europe and then fought to establish Israel, Masada was reborn as a symbol of resistance against impossible odds. Today, Israeli military recruits climb Masada's ancient paths and swear Masada shall not fall again. A vow that transforms ancient tragedy into modern determination. The archaeological excavations led by Yigael Yadin in the 1960s revealed the fortress exactly as Josephus described, confirming that this wasn't mere legend but documented history. The price of freedom. The siege of Masada forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about resistance, sacrifice, and the price of freedom. Were Eleazar and his followers heroes who chose death over dishonor, or were they extremists who chose a horrific end over possible survival? The answer may depend on whether we view them through the lens of their time or our own. What cannot be disputed is the profound impact of their choice. In an age when might made right and empires crushed resistance without a second thought, 960 Jews on a mountain demonstrated that the human spirit cannot be conquered, only destroyed. Their story reminds us that sometimes the most powerful victory is the one that denies your enemy the satisfaction of defeat. The desert wind still blows across Masada's ruins, carrying with it the whispers of those who chose eternity over slavery, death over dishonor, and legacy over life itself.